where you'll get early access to all our stories plus unique original cheating partner stories you won't find anywhere else. You can subscribe now by following the link in the description or the pinned comment, or simply search for Betrayal Chronicles Lab on YouTube. Don't miss out. Subscribe to hear exclusive stories. You won't regret subscribing. Now let's start the story. Brian Carter's BMW glided down the peaceful streets of Evanston on a calm Sunday afternoon. The civil engineer gripped the steering wheel with steady hands, proud of finishing the Chicago project ahead of time. 2 decades of dedication had earned him a reputation for excellence in his field. Every bridge, building, and foundation he designed stood as a testament to his unwavering commitment to quality. At 46, Brian embodied success built through relentless drive. His tall, athletic figure reflected the early morning workouts that kept him sharp. His steel blue eyes, missing no detail, had spotted countless potential structural risks before they turned catastrophic. That same attention to detail had helped him build what he thought was an ideal life for his family. His 2-story colonial home came into view, its manicured lawn and immaculate exterior reflecting the orderly life Brian had created. His wife Laura's white SUV was parked beside Jackson's used sedan, a choice Brian encouraged to teach their eldest responsibility despite their financial comfort. The unusual quiet, absent of Jackson's video games or Ella's piano practice, struck him. He retrieved his briefcase from the trunk, satisfaction coursing through him at the signed deals inside. The Chicago office complex would be a standout addition to his firm's portfolio. The idea of surprising his family with his early return boosted his spirits after the long drive. The side door opened without a sound. Brian believed in maintaining his home in pristine condition. No squeaky hinges or loose boards would ever compromise its integrity. The house felt quiet, though he knew Laura and Jackson were likely home. Voices floated down from upstairs as he crossed the foyer. Brian moved toward the stairs, then froze as he heard Laura's words. "The paternity test results are in." Her voice carried a tone of smug triumph that felt foreign from the woman he'd known for 19 years. "None of the 3 kids are Brian's," she continued. "Once he finishes paying Jackson's college fees, we'll tell him at graduation. And then I'll get the house and assets." In the divorce, the world came into sharp focus. Brian stood still, his mind processing the implications with the same analytical precision he applied to structural analysis. "Are you sure about this?" Jackson's voice wavered. "Dad's always been there for us." "Oh, please." Laura's laugh was sharp. "Brian's just been a useful provider. Always focused on his career, proud of taking care of everyone. He never questioned why I spent so much time with Richard. Men like your father are easy to fool when they think they're in control." Brian's mind raced back over the years. Richard Carter, their family doctor and supposed friend, the man who delivered all 3 kids, attended countless dinners and family events. But what about Ella and Tom? Jackson's question mirrored Brian's thoughts. "They really admire Dad. They'll adapt," Laura replied dismissively. "Richard is their real father anyway. And we'll have plenty after the settlement. Brian's new deals will give us a comfortable life." "Richard says everything's lined up," Laura went on, her voice smug. "We've been planning this for years. Your father's so predictable. Always at work, always trusting, always the devoted family man. He's created such a nice life for us to take over once he's out." The conversation continued, each word revealing deeper layers of betrayal. "Here's the rewritten content according to your request." Laura described years of deception, coordinated medical appointments as covers for their meetings, careful manipulation of mutual friends, and strategic exploitation of Brian's long work hours. Brian remained motionless, absorbing every detail. The civil engineer in him recognized the intricate web of lies built around him. Every business trip he'd taken to support his family had provided an opportunity for betrayal. Every late night spent completing projects had given them time to deepen their deception. Richards handled everything at the practice. Laura's voice was filled with admiration for her lover's cunning. "All the records support our story. Brian won't be able to dispute anything once we reveal the truth. His reputation for being so proper will work against him. No one will believe he didn't know." Their conversation shifted to plans for after the revelation. Laura spoke of vacations they'd take with Brian's money, how she'd redecorate the house once it was hers, how their social circle would adapt to the new reality she and Richard had orchestrated. Brian finally moved, his steps silent as he retreated to his office. The family photos along the hallway showed scenes from a life he now realized was a performance. Laura's broad smiles at gatherings, Richard's casual arm around her at barbecues, the kids' school events where both men attended as father and family friend. Each image now unveiled its hidden narrative. He sat at his desk, surrounded by the certificates and awards from his engineering career. His success, grounded in precision and analysis, had made him a target. Laura and Richard had exploited his dedication, counting on his long hours and trusting nature to conceal their affair. The irony struck him. The civil engineer who specialized in identifying hidden flaws had overlooked the instability within his own home. But unlike his professional projects, where he worked to prevent collapse, this structure of lies deserved to fall. That evening, Brian maintained his usual routine with calculated composure. He sat through dinner watching Laura perform her role of devoted wife, asking about his trip, smiling appropriately, and giving no indication that she'd spent the afternoon planning their future without him. The children continued with their evening activities. Jackson worked on college applications, the weight of his mother's revelation evident in his strained responses. Ella practiced her piano, the melancholy notes resonating with new significance. Tom argued about his bedtime, his teenage defiance masking an innocence soon to be shattered. Brian observed them with a new clarity, noticing Richard's features in their faces, details he'd once dismissed as familial resemblance. The knowledge didn't lessen his love for them, but highlighted the calculated nature of the deceit. Later that night, after the house had quieted, Brian sat alone in his office. The civil engineer who'd built a career ensuring stability now faced the ultimate test of resilience. Laura and Richard had spent nearly 2 decades crafting their deception. They believed their plan flawless, their timing perfect, but they'd overlooked one crucial factor. They'd mistaken Brian's commitment for weakness, his trust for blindness, his devotion to his family as a lever to be used against him. The man who had succeeded by anticipating and preventing failures was now uniquely prepared to engineer one. The next morning, Brian rose early as usual. He kissed Laura goodbye, acknowledged her practiced smile, and drove to his office. To any observer, nothing had changed. The respected engineer was simply starting another day of ensuring structures stood strong and true. But beneath his calm exterior, Brian's mind was working with cold precision. Laura and Richard had based their plan on the assumption that he would remain the devoted husband until their moment of victory. They expected him to continue working, adding to the assets they intended to seize, maintaining the life they planned to take over. They would soon learn that underestimating Brian Carter was a critical flaw in their design. The man they viewed as predictable and overly trusting was about to reveal how dangerous such assumptions could be. The enormity of their betrayal, 2 decades of marriage, 3 children, and countless manufactured moments might have broken a lesser man. But Brian had built his career on understanding structural failures so he could prevent them. This time, he'd apply that knowledge for a different purpose. Laura and Richard's scheme, years in the making, relied on Brian's ignorance and their control of the story. They'd planned every detail, manipulated every relationship, prepared for every scenario, except one: the possibility that their target would uncover their plot before they could spring the trap. That evening, Brian watched Laura checking her phone repeatedly, likely exchanging messages with Richard about their impending triumph. She had no idea her carefully crafted plans were about to face an integrity test they couldn't withstand. The price of their betrayal wouldn't be measured in years of deceit, but in the full weight of their downfall. Brian Carter, the man they underestimated as trusting and preoccupied, was about to show them the real cost of such assumptions. The methodical nature that made Brian Carter an exceptional civil engineer now drove his response to Laura's betrayal. For 2 weeks, he maintained an outward appearance of normalcy while systematically dismantling the elaborate deception his wife and Richard had crafted. His first step was accessing the family's financial records. Late at night, sitting in his home office, Brian discovered a pattern of transactions confirming the extent of their duplicity. Small transfers from joint accounts over years had accumulated into a significant hidden fund. "Quite clever, Laura," he muttered, reviewing the bank statements. "Death by 1,000 cuts." The next morning, Brian received a call from his bank's fraud department. "Mr. Carter, we've noticed some unusual patterns in your joint accounts," the representative said. "Yes, I imagine you have," Brian replied. "I'd like to meet with Bradley Morton today, if possible." Bradley, the branch manager, had managed Brian's accounts for over a decade. His face grew increasingly concerned as Brian presented the evidence of Laura's systematic theft. "This is highly irregular, Brian. These transfers have been happening for years." "Exactly, Bradley. I need complete records of every transaction. Can you help me with that?" "Of course." Bradley hesitated. "Given the pattern, we should discuss protecting your remaining assets." Brian's smile held no warmth. "My thoughts exactly." Later that week, Brian discovered emails between Laura and Richard detailing their plans. The password to Laura's laptop, Jackson's birthday, revealed that arrogance had made them careless. The messages exposed years of coordinated deception, from Ricardo at medoffice.com to Lorax76 at mail.com. Subject: Next week. Everything's set for your appointment Tuesday. Brian's Chicago trip gives us plenty of time. The kids' records are secure. No one will ever question paternity. Your husband's too focused on his projects to see what's in front of him. Brian downloaded everything, maintaining his digital forensics with the same precision he applied to engineering analysis. Each piece of evidence was cataloged, dated, and securely backed up. A discreet inquiry through his professional network led him to Salvador Emery, a divorce attorney known for handling complex cases with ruthless efficiency. They met in Salvador's downtown office, away from prying eyes. "Tell me everything," Salvador said, his office overlooking a courthouse that Brian had helped design. Brian methodically presented the evidence: financial records, emails, medical documents. Salvador's eyebrows rose higher as he reviewed each item. "They've been thorough," the lawyer noted, "but arrogant. That's good for us. Arrogant people make mistakes." "My priority is to protect the children," Brian stated. "They're not biologically mine," Salvador held up a hand. "They're yours in every way that matters. We'll set up trust funds, ironclad ones. Laura won't touch a dime. She and Richard have been spreading rumors," Brian continued, "painting me as distant, suggesting emotional issues. Classic sympathy ploy." Salvador nodded. "But it won't work. Your reputation, your records, your consistent presence in your children's lives. It all works in our favor." In the following days, Brian noticed subtle changes in Laura's behavior. She took more private calls, scheduled urgent meetings with Richard, watched Brian with poorly concealed suspicion. "Is everything okay?" she asked one evening, her tone probing. Brian looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing trust fund documents. "Just focused on work, dear." "Ugh, usual." Laura's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You work too hard. Maybe you should take a break." "After Jackson's graduation," Brian replied, watching her flinch slightly at the mention of their anticipated moment of victory. The next day, Richard called Brian's office. "Brian, it's been too long." Richard's voice dripped with false camaraderie. "Laura mentioned you seemed stressed. Why not come in for a checkup?" "Thanks, Richard, but I'm perfectly fine," Brian replied coolly. The call confirmed Brian's suspicions. They were accelerating their timeline. That evening, he overheard Laura on the phone with Richard. "He knows something's off," she whispered. "We need to move faster." "Calm down." Richard's voice was clear on Brian's recording device. "We planned this for years. He can't prove anything." "But what if?" "Trust me, Laura. I've handled everything. The records, the paternity, our story. It's airtight. Once we file, no one will believe him." Brian added the recording to his evidence file, grimly aware of their overconfidence. The following week, Laura and Richard made their move. Brian received notice of a domestic complaint filed with the authorities. The allegations were cleverly framed. No physical abuse, only emotional manipulation and controlling behavior. designed to be hard to disprove. But Brian was prepared. He presented the authorities with comprehensive records of his whereabouts for each alleged incident, along with evidence of Laura's affair and their conspiracy. Detective Sarah Chan reviewed the documentation with growing astonishment. "This is comprehensive, Mr. Carter. I'm an engineer, detective. Documentation is second nature. The timing makes these claims seem retaliatory," she noted, especially with these recordings. When Laura learned the allegations had been dismissed, she made a desperate move. Brian received an urgent call from Bradley Morton. "She's trying to drain the joint accounts," the banker reported. "All of them. Let me guess, a transfer to an account we've been monitoring?" "Exactly. But as discussed, the accounts are frozen," Brian finished. "Thank you, Bradley." That evening, Laura's composure finally broke. She stormed into Brian's office, her face flushed with anger. "What did you do?" she demanded. Brian looked up calmly. "You'll need to be more specific." "The accounts? I can't access our money." "Our money?" Brian repeated, tilting his head thoughtfully. "Interesting choice of words, considering the separate account you've been funding for years." Laura's face paled. "Yes, me," Brian replied. The husband too preoccupied with work to notice what's right in front of him. "Isn't that how Richard phrased it? You've been spying on me?" "No, Laura, I've been protecting myself." "There's a difference." She quickly recovered, her lips curling into a smirk. "It doesn't matter. Once everything comes out about the kids." "You mean the paternity Richard helped you conceal? The falsified records?" Laura took a step back. "You're bluffing." "I'm an engineer, Laura. I deal in facts, not bluffs. The kids will hate you when they find out the truth." "The truth?" Brian's voice stayed steady. "The truth is that I've loved them, supported them, and been there for them their whole lives. The truth is that you and Richard plan to use them as pawns in your scheme. The truth, Laura, is that you've underestimated me for the last time." She left the study, already dialing Richard's number. Brian returned to his work, adding this conversation to his growing evidence. Laura and Richard had spent years creating their perfect plan, but they'd failed to account for one critical factor. They'd chosen the wrong man to betray. Salvador called the next morning. "They're getting desperate. Richard tried to access your medical records at the hospital. Let me guess, records that might support their fabricated claims?" "Exactly. But the hospital's internal audit flagged it. His unauthorized access has been logged and reported." Brian nodded, adding this to his files. "They're making mistakes. Big ones." Salvador agreed. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Brian replied honestly. "Everything's going according to plan." The following days saw Laura and Richard growing more frantic as their carefully constructed scheme unraveled, piece by piece. Every move they made was anticipated and countered. Every attempt to salvage their plan only provided Brian with more evidence. Their mutual friends, sensing something was off, began asking questions. Laura's efforts to maintain her narrative of Brian's supposed emotional neglect crumbled under the weight of years of contradictory evidence. Richard's professional reputation began to take hits as rumors of ethical breaches circulated in medical circles. Brian watched it all unfold with the detached interest of an engineer observing a controlled demolition. Each desperate action Laura and Richard took only weakened their position further. Their dream of escaping with Brian's assets and reputation intact was crumbling, and they had no one to blame but themselves. As the 2 weeks concluded, Brian had everything ready. The trust funds for the kids were secure. His assets were protected. The evidence was organized and documented. Laura and Richard's attempts to seize control had been thwarted at every turn. They had spent almost 2 decades constructing their deception. Brian had needed only 14 days to dismantle it completely. Now, all that was left was to wait for the ideal moment to bring their entire scheme crashing down around them. The morning of Jackson's high school graduation dawned bright and clear. Brian Carter stood in his kitchen at 5 a.m., methodically laying out documents on the marble countertop. The DNA test results lay beside the divorce papers, each page sealing Laura's carefully crafted lies. Salvador Emery had filed the divorce papers the previous day, ensuring everything was legally in motion before the reveal. The grounds were clear. adultery and fraud spanning almost 2 decades. The documentation was exhaustive, leaving no room for contest or denial. Everything's ready, Salvador had confirmed during their final meeting. The trust funds are ironclad. Each child's education and future are secure, separate from the divorce proceedings. Brian placed 3 sealed envelopes beside the documents, each labeled with one of his children's names. Inside, each letter held everything they needed to understand: bank statements revealing Laura's systematic theft, email exchanges between her and Richard detailing their scheme, medical records exposing Richard's manipulation of paternity information, and, most importantly, Brian's personal words to each child. To Jackson, he wrote about pride, not in academic achievements or athletic successes, but in his growing sense of integrity. He included proof of the college trust fund, ensuring his eldest wouldn't have to compromise his future. Ella's letter acknowledged her love for music and art, passions Laura had always dismissed. Brian had established a fund to support her artistic pursuits, ensuring she could follow her dreams without financial worry. For Tom, the youngest, Brian included tickets to the gaming convention they'd planned to attend, prepaid and transferable. His letter emphasized that family wasn't defined by DNA, but by choice and love. The sound of movement upstairs signaled the start of the day's orchestrated revelations. Brian had already removed his essentials from the house, leaving behind the remnants of the life Laura had planned to take over. Laura entered the kitchen first, already dressed for the graduation in an expensive dress bought with Brian's money. She froze at the sight of the documents on the counter. "What's this?" Her voice wavered, attempting authority. "The truth," Brian replied simply, sliding the DNA results forward. "Though I suspect you're already familiar with it." Laura's face went pale as she scanned the papers. "These are fake." "You can't." "Fake? Like the past 19 years of our marriage? Like Richard's medical records? Like your love?" "You don't understand." Laura's voice turned pleading. "You did it for kids." "No," Brian cut her off. "You did it for yourself, and now you'll face the consequences." Heavy footsteps on the stairs signaled Jackson's arrival. He entered the kitchen in his graduation robe, stopping short at the tension in the room. "Dad, Mom, what's going on?" "Your mother was just about to explain," Brian said calmly. "About the paternity test, her plans after your graduation, about Richard." Jackson's face showed recognition. He'd been burdened by his mother's revelation for weeks. Laura turned to him, desperate. "Jackson, honey, you don't understand. Your father is trying to—" "To what, Mom?" Jackson's voice was firm. "Expose what you told me? About how none of us are his kids? About taking his money after graduation?" Ella and Tom appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock as they saw the documents spread across the counter. For years passed like blueprints through Brian Carter's hands, precise, measured, each detail in its place. Seattle had proven the perfect place to rebuild his life. The city's constant rain and towering skyscrapers mirrored his methodical nature, and his reputation as a civil engineer only grew stronger. His corner office at Wilson Carter Engineering overlooked the city he'd helped reshape. 3 major projects bore his signature: a revolutionary earthquake-resistant hospital, a sustainable corporate headquarters, and a bridge local papers called a work of art. The morning Jackson found him, Brian was reviewing plans for his latest project. His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Carter, there's a young man here to see you. He says his name is Jackson." Brian's hand stilled over the blueprints. He'd known this day might come. He'd left enough breadcrumbs in his carefully crafted exit for his children to find if they chose to. "Send him in, Claire." Jackson entered, taller than Brian remembered, with the confidence of a college senior. His features, so much like Richard's, had matured, but his eyes held the same integrity Brian had always seen in them. "You weren't easy to find," Jackson said, standing just inside the door. "That wasn't the point," Brian replied, gesturing to a chair. "The point was that you could find me if you wanted to." Jackson sat, studying the man who'd raised him. Mom lost everything: the house, her friends, her reputation, all of it. A bitter smile crossed Jackson's face. Richard left her as soon as the divorce settlement came through. Turns out his love was as fake as hers. Brian nodded, unsurprised. And your siblings? Ella's thriving at art school. The trust fund you set up made that possible. Tom's finishing high school, top of his class in computer science. We all read the letters. We understood why you left. The silence between them held years of unspoken words. Brian waited, letting Jackson find his voice. Mom lives in a one-bedroom apartment now. Works at Marshall's folding clothes. She tries to contact us constantly, begging for forgiveness, saying she's changed. Jackson's voice hardened. None of us want anything to do with her. That's your choice to make, Brian said. I made sure you'd have that freedom. Richard's medical license was suspended, Jackson continued. The review board found more falsified records. His wife left. Him. Took half of everything. Last I heard, he moved to Arizona to start over. Brian's expression remained neutral. The fate of his betrayers meant nothing to him now. Mom told us you were emotionally distant, Jackson said, leaning forward, that you cared more about your buildings than us. But you're the one who made sure we were taken care of, who gave us the truth, who let us choose our own paths. DNA doesn't make a father, Brian replied simply. Jackson pulled out his phone, showing pictures of Ella's art exhibitions and Tom's robotics competitions. We've been keeping track of your projects, too. That hospital design in Portland? Tom says it's brilliant. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Jackson shared stories of college life, his plans for graduate school, the ways he and his siblings had supported each other through the aftermath of their parents' deception. Ella and Tom want to see you, Jackson said finally, when you're ready. They understand if you don't. I'd like that, Brian cut in. The children he'd raised choosing to return to him meant more than any victory over Laura and Richard. Over the next few months, Ella and Tom visited separately. Each meeting healed another part of what Laura and Richard had tried to destroy. Ella, her artistic soul wrapped in quiet strength, brought photos of her installations. The trust fund changed everything, she told him. Mom always said art was a waste of time, that I needed to be practical like her. But you believed in me. Even after. I believed in you because of who you are, Brian replied. That hasn't changed. Tom, nearly as tall as Brian now, talked technology and engineering with the enthusiasm Brian remembered. Your letter helped me understand what integrity really means, he said during one visit. Watching Mom and Richard fall apart, seeing how their lies caught up with them, taught me what not to be. Their mother's attempts to re-enter their lives became a constant background noise they all ignored. Laura's calls, texts, and emails painted a picture of a desperate woman facing the consequences of her choices. She showed up at my dorm, Ella reported during one visit. Said she was a changed person, that she'd learned her lesson. But all I could think about was how she and Richard plotted to take everything from you. Tom's encounter with his mother at a grocery store revealed how far she'd fallen. She was wearing a Marshall's uniform, looked so different from the woman who used to host dinner parties and plan our lives. She tried to hug me, started crying when I walked away. Brian's success grew with each passing year. His firm's reputation for innovation and integrity attracted major clients across the country. The irony wasn't lost on him. While Laura folded clothes and Richard rebuilt his practice in Arizona, Brian's wealth and influence had multiplied. Your mother keeps trying to friend me on social media, Claire, his secretary, mentioned one day. Should I block her? She's not worth the effort, Brian replied. Let her see what she lost. The children's visits became more frequent. Family dinners at Brian's penthouse apartment replaced the forced gatherings of their past. They built new traditions, stronger for being chosen rather than obligated. Jackson brought his girlfriend to meet Brian first, before introducing her to any other family. You're the one whose opinion matters, he explained. Ella sought Brian's advice about gallery showings and commissions. Tom called to discuss engineering concepts and career choices. The family they rebuilt wasn't bound by DNA, but by something far more powerful: truth, respect, and conscious choice. Laura's betrayal had cost her everything she'd schemed to gain, while Brian's integrity had given him something far more valuable than what he'd lost. Do you ever regret how thoroughly you destroyed their plans? Jackson asked one evening. watching the Seattle sunset from Brian's balcony. Brian considered the question. Regret would imply they deserve mercy. Your mother and Richard spent 18 years plotting to take everything I built, using my love for you three as a weapon. They earned every consequence. The children understood. They'd seen firsthand how betrayal masquerading as love could destroy foundations once thought unbreakable. More importantly, they'd witnessed how integrity and strength could build something even stronger from the ruins. Laura's desperate attempts at contact continued over the years, each ignored with the same finality as Brian's execution of his revenge. Her messages spoke of loneliness, regret, a changed heart, words as empty as her promises had been. Mom's getting desperate, Ella reported after another failed attempt at reconciliation. She actually suggested family counseling, said we could all heal together. Brian's response was direct. Healing implies she has something worth saving. She made her choice 18 years ago. Now she can live with it. The contrast between their lives grew sharper with each passing year. While Brian's firm expanded to new cities and his children flourished in their chosen paths, Laura's world remained confined to her small apartment and retail job. Richard, rebuilding a modest practice in Arizona, had remarried but lost that family too when his past caught up with him. Your revenge wasn't anything you did to them, Tom observed during one of their regular dinners. It was succeeding without them, being happy despite them, and letting them watch from the sidelines. Brian smiled at his youngest insight. The best revenge is building something they can never touch. As the years passed, Brian's definition of success evolved. It wasn't measured by the buildings he designed or the wealth he accumulated, but by the family that chose to return to him. Jackson's wedding, Ella's gallery openings, Tom's graduation, each milestone celebrated without Laura marked another victory of substance over deception. The family photos in Brian's office told the new story. Three children who chose truth over convenience, integrity over betrayal, and a father who earned their love through actions rather than biology. Laura's betrayal had cost her everything she valued, while Brian's principles had given him something far more precious, a family bound by choice rather than obligation. His revenge wasn't in the calculated destruction of Laura and Richard's plans, but in the peace and success he found without them and in the love his children chose to give him even after learning the truth. The price of betrayal had been everything Laura held dear, while the reward for integrity was a family stronger than blood. Epilogue. 10 years after Brian Carter's masterful dismantling of Laura and Richard's scheme, the consequences of their betrayal continued to shape their lives in ways they never anticipated. Laura Morgan, she'd reverted to her maiden name after even Richard abandoned her, still worked the evening shift at Marshall's. Her small one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of Evanston stood in stark contrast to the life she'd once plotted to take. The designer clothes and luxury cars had been replaced by clearance rack outfits and bus passes. Her attempts to rebuild her social standing failed spectacularly. Former friends who once attended her lavish dinners now crossed the street to avoid her. Her country club membership had been revoked after the truth about her affair with Richard emerged. Her weekly routine consisted of folding clothes, stocking shelves, and watching on social media as her children celebrated life's milestones without her. Did you see the photos from Jackson's daughter's christening? She asked her only remaining friend, a fellow retail worker, during their lunch break. Brian was there. He's a grandfather now, and I wasn't even told about the pregnancy. Richard Wiley's downfall proved equally drastic. After the medical board suspended his license in Evanston, his attempt to rebuild in Arizona crumbled as his past caught up with him. His second wife left after discovering his history of deception, taking half of his already diminished assets. Now in his early 60s, Richard ran a small medical consultation business in Phoenix, his practice limited to reviewing files rather than treating patients. His once respected name now carried an asterisk that no amount of time seemed to erase. Dr. Wiley's recommendations will be taken under advisement became the standard response from hospitals and insurance companies, code for his opinion carrying little weight. Meanwhile, Brian's empire grew beyond even his careful planning. Wilson and Carter Engineering now had offices in 6 major cities, with Brian's innovative designs reshaping skylines nationwide. His memoir, Building on Integrity, A Civil Engineer's Journey, became required reading in engineering programs, though it never mentioned Laura or Richard by name. His children's lives reflected the strength of choosing truth over convenience. Jackson, now a successful corporate lawyer, married Sarah, a pediatric surgeon. Their daughter, Claire, became the center of Brian's world. He designed and built them a home that architectural magazines featured as a perfect blend of form and function. Ella's artistic career flourished. Her installations, exploring themes of truth, deception, and chosen family, were shown in galleries worldwide. She found love with Rebecca, a gallery curator who understood the healing power of art. Brian walked her down the aisle at their wedding, while Laura learned about it through a local newspaper article. Tom followed in Brian's footsteps, but in his own way. His software company specialized in structural analysis programs, combining his father's engineering precision with his passion for technology. He married his college sweetheart, Maria, and their twin boys spent weekends in Brian's workshop, learning about building things that last. The annual Carter family gatherings at Brian's Seattle penthouse became legendary in their social circle. Children, spouses, and now grandchildren celebrated holidays and milestones, their bond. Stronger for being chosen rather than inherited. Laura's Christmas cards to her children, sent faithfully each year, remained unopened before being discarded. Her attempts to contact her grandchildren on social media were blocked. The trust funds Brian established ensured that neither she nor Richard could ever use money as leverage to regain access to the family. "Your mother was at the mall again," Sarah told Jackson one evening. She tried to approach Claire. "Did she tell you what happened to her real grandmother?" Jackson asked, referring to Brian's mother, who had become the loving grandmother Laura could never be. Richard's third marriage dissolved after his new wife discovered his pattern of infidelity. His adult children from his first marriage, learning of his betrayal of the Carters, cut contact. His medical consultation business barely covered his alimony payments, and his attempts to publish in medical journals were met with polite rejections. Karma, as Ella observed during one family dinner, doesn't need help when truth does its work. The mutual friends who initially believed Laura's stories about Brian's supposed emotional distance now sought his advice on business and personal matters. His reputation for integrity and strategic thinking only grew stronger with time. Several invested in his firm, their faith rewarded by his consistent success. Brian's relationship with his children deepened each passing year. He became the confidant they turned to for major life decisions, the grandfather who never missed a recital or game, the father who showed them that character trumped biology. The family photographs in his office told the story of triumph over betrayal. Jackson's law school graduation, Ella's first solo show, Tom's company launch. Each image captured a moment of success built on the foundation of truth Brian had laid. Laura watched this happiness from the edges of social media and local news. The walls of her small apartment held photos of the children from before the revelation, frozen in time like her dreams of the life she tried to steal. Richard, reduced to consulting from a home office in Phoenix, sometimes Googled his former medical practice, now a thriving clinic under new management. His medical license remained permanently restricted, his name a cautionary tale in ethics seminars. Neighborhood kids still pointed at Laura at the Marshall store, whispering about the woman who lost everything because of her lies. She'd aged beyond her years, the stress of her downfall etched into her face. The designer anti-aging creams had been replaced by drugstore brands, her salon visits by home dye kits. In contrast, Brian had grown distinguished with age. His success attracted attention from younger women, but he remained focused on his family and work. His reputation as one of the nation's premier civil engineers was matched only by his standing as a devoted father and grandfather. "How do you feel about Mom now?" Tom asked during one family gathering, watching his twins play with their cousins. "I don't," Brian replied simply. "She's not worth the energy of feeling anything." The price of betrayal had been complete. Laura and Richard had lost not just their material comforts and social standing, but the very things they tried to steal: family, respect, and peace. Their punishment wasn't in any single action Brian had taken, but in the daily reminder of all they'd thrown away. The legacy of their betrayal served as a reminder that true family transcended biology, that integrity outlasted deception, and that the most devastating revenge was living well in plain sight of those who tried to destroy you. Brian Carter's greatest victory wasn't in the buildings he designed or the wealth he accumulated, but in the family that chose him, the respect he maintained, and the peace he found in knowing that justice sometimes worked exactly as intended. For Laura Morgan and Richard Wiley, the real punishment wasn't in losing their material possessions or social status, but in watching from the sidelines as the family they tried to destroy thrived without them, bound together by something stronger than the lies they'd thought would never be discovered. The price of betrayal, it turned out, was paid not just in lost assets and opportunities, but in the daily recognition that some choices carried consequences that no amount of time could erase. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new videos from us. What do you think about today's topic? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found the video helpful, feel free to share it with your friends and family. We hope you had a great time. See you in the next video with even more exciting content. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.